Filmmakers make films, but films make filmmakers. From blockbuster premieres to grindhouse theaters, late night cable to the local video store, there is no greater classroom for aspiring filmmakers than cinema itself. Join your host, Eric Skwarczynski, as he dives deep into the minds of legendary directors, producers, actors, and more to discover their biggest influences and to explore the impact their films are leaving behind. This is Film School. Grab your popcorn. Class is about to begin.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Joe, thank you so much for joining me on today's podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, excited to chat with you today because you're kind of the perfect fit for this show because everything you talk about, everything you do kind of bleeds with your love for movies and cinema. And I kind of wanted to know, what was the first thing that kind of rocked your world and made you go like, oh, I love movies. This was it.
Oh my God. I mean, there's too many. And it's funny because I was watching Ghostbusters last night because, you know, I'm this sounds so weird. It's like I'm preparing for Afterlife, which if you say it like out of context, you go, oh, what the hell? Like, but I wanted to really kind of remind myself of why I love that movie so much so that I can bring that love into the new one with it, you know, with an open mind. I know, you know, too many Ghostbuster incels in the past have probably taken that a little too seriously when it came to the last remake. And then this one being such a direct connection to the original film. And I will never forget the feeling that I had when I saw the original Ghostbusters, because this was right after I had started to realize, because I was a nincompoop when I was a little kid, that there weren't people behind the screen acting out the scenes. For the longest time, I thought that there were performers in C-3PO suits and with lightsabers and, you know, and all the actors and all the props and sets were actually behind the screen, like more of a theatrical experience, to the point where I would actually run down. This is back in the day when there were only the two screens in a given theater, like those mom and pop ones before all the multiplexes came out. They were much bigger rooms, but they all had exits that were like on the left and the right, but they would give you access to what was essentially behind the screen. I thought that I thought Luke Skywalker was going to be behind there. I thought that maybe there's a chance that like Peter Venkman and all those guys would be back there and be like, hey, what's up? You know, I almost slimed you next. But essentially I came to the realization that is not true, but it was still the feeling that a 2D image of like with Ghostbusters, I'll never forget the moment when, and it's such a random moment too, when the guy gets in the cab and Reitman slides the camera over to reveal the disgusting Steve Johnson cab driver zombie. And I remember being genuinely freaked out by that. And again, I had seen many horror movies at that point. I think it was just that my brain at the time when I was 7, my brain equated PG movies with being safe, that I was in a safe space. Which is crazy because, you know, I grew up in the era where HBO was coming out and you could watch Beastmaster or Poltergeist or even Salem's Lot. And there were incredibly disturbing moments in those films during the day, like in broad daylight, whereas I always expected them to be, you know, presented to you at night when it's supposed to be spooky and scary.
Right.
So, you know, those little random moments when I was a little kid, before I was able to literally pull the curtain back and realize that like it's makeup, it's special effects, it's miniatures, it's optical printing, and now it's all VFX. I was still able to kind of relinquish my eye for craft and just fall into the story and just fall into the characters and believe. Yeah. And that's the thing that it's kind of like the Santa Claus factor, where there is a part of you, especially now that I'm a parent, that wants to hold on to the hopes that your kids will continue to think that there's still magic in the world like Santa Claus. and you hold it all the way up to a point. And then you get to that one Christmas where they're like, Dad, come on. I know it's you. It's like you're the one who's biting the carrot and eating the cookie and putting all the presents out. I know when the closet starts to get full and I'm not allowed to go in that room. Like, I get it now. But if you can retain that for as long as possible, that's a gift.
Yeah.
And with movies, I lost that very early on. I think it was probably when I started to really read Fangoria. And started to realize like, oh, wow, there is a lot of craft that goes into, even just the creature designs, even the, the blood effects and everything. But then going, oh, but there's cameras involved and there's lenses and there's lights and there's, actors in costume. Once you start to peel that curtain back a little bit, I don't necessarily want to say that, you lose a little bit of that luster because look, so many of us have worked in the business so long. We still love movies. We still, appreciate them. But once you start realizing like things like making your days and, having to have things that don't work on set and how that will impact the rest of your day. And, just realizing that there is money involved that will directly affect your storytelling skills and what ends up on screen. Once that becomes part of your life, it's a little harder to fall into loving a movie. For example, when I was making this movie called Knights of Badassdom, I was up in Spokane, Washington at the time shooting it, and it was a miserable experience because I went in going, we're making Goonies for grownups. And, I grew up with the Goonies. So to me, I just thought like it was Dick Donner setting up a tripod and all the kids like in the caves and all the kids were just kind of doing their thing and he'd capture it and they'd put it on the screen. And that was it. Not realizing child labor laws and, effects that will not work and all the things that go into making a movie like that. So Knights of Badassdom was such a disaster of an experience from the production standpoint. I found out later that it was partially due to the fact that it was a Ponzi scheme. So they were lying to us in terms of budget, what we had and all the resources. But, being such a huge Edgar Wright fan and such a huge Scott Pilgrim fan at the time, Scott Pilgrim was coming out on one of the weekends that I was shooting. I was so excited for it. Oh my God. Like, because I love the comic and I love what Edgar was doing and everything I had seen was just kind of like totally my jam. And I could not have disliked it more at the time because I had heard, and I even talked to Edgar about this at the time. He was like, oh yeah, I had like 80 shooting days and I was in the middle of hell on my 15th day out of 24. And going, how the hell can I compete with that when I'm making my movie? And comparing, and that's the hardest thing is like when you start comparing production value and time, how long it takes to, make a movie. And sometimes it dulls the light a little bit in wanting to fall into watching a movie. Now, that said, I just saw Scott Pilgrim again in 4K when it came out, I think in like April or something like that. They did a re-release. And I went to the Burbank 16 and just kind of got, because what's funny? I'd never seen the movie again. I almost felt like embarrassed that I walked out of that movie going, fuck you, Edgar. Like, how dare you like try to make a cool movie with 80 days? Like, fuck this, you suck. And that's look totally unfair. If I was just a casual movie fan, or if I wasn't in the middle of production, I probably would have liked it so much more. But I took so much bias from my own issues and problems trying to make a movie that I foisted that onto Scott Pilgrim. Yeah. And just watching it again in April, it's a fucking masterpiece. Yeah. Because I wasn't in production at the time, so I was able to just sit back, eat my popcorn, watch every whip pan and body wipe go by and be thrilled with it and just kind of fall into the storytelling skills that Edgar obviously has without having to compare it to myself.
Well, I mean, it kind of shows how much we bring with us to the theater. Like there's so much baggage, even outside of a filmmaking realm, like watching a movie like Hereditary after you've experienced loss is going to affect you a lot differently, or walking into any type of film, walking into Mayhem after having a bad day at work is going to play a little bit differently.
I see. What's funny is that I was praying for that with Mayhem because I knew how much it was personal to me, because I went through that. Yeah. But also knowing, like, if I felt that way, I'm hoping other people are going to bring that type of baggage to it so that they feel like it's more cathartic. Yeah. You sometimes you want the audience to leave their baggage at the door and just kind of like let the film wash over them in an entertainment way, in a message sort of way. But then there are times that you go, no, grab your bags, bring them along with us, and we'll all jump into the ferry like Willy Wonka, and we'll let it like just kind of, we'll absorb all of it. And hopefully by the time it's over, we can at least go, you feel that way too? So do I. Sometimes you want it to be a passive experience, but sometimes you want people to bring that stuff to the table. Right. Well, I'm kind of curious because there is this level of magic. Yes, you lose the magic of just believing everything on screen, but you get the magic of seeing how it's made. You get a new level of respect for the craft and the people behind it. And you've mentioned people like George Romero. You've mentioned Tobe Hooper as inspirations. Is that something that, aside from the films being amazing, which they are, do you resonate with kind of the scrappy nature of them taking very limited resources? They weren't getting 80 days. They were out in the middle of Texas, nowhere, shooting and trying to make something work. Is that part of the appeal of those types of filmmakers? I think, well, if you take George and Tobe specifically, here are two filmmakers that basically pulled up their socks and said, we're going to make these stories visually with whatever we have, with whoever's around. And they did it in a very do-it-yourself kind of sensibility. And having grown up in the world where, like, in the 90s, where, people are doing human testing to get a budget for El Mariachi, or just putting everything on a credit card, like in Clerks. But they're getting those movies done. They're getting them made. They're being put out in theaters, or at least festivals. So to look back at, like, both George and Tobe and how they made, Night of the Living Dead or Texas Chainsaw Massacre respectively, but then evolved. And you can see, like, the George who had no money for Night, who had a little more money for Dawn, who had a little bit more money for, Creepshow or Night Riders. And then, to take his biggest budget film, I guess, would be Land of the Dead. Yeah. And on the flip side, look at Tobe and, to go from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which had a very definitive style, was wearing its, like, do-it-yourself kind of attitude almost on its sleeve. But that was, and not to sidebar this, but that was something that was a byproduct of bad prints and a lot less attention paid to the aesthetic of Texas Chainsaw, because everyone just kept saying, like, oh, it's practically a docudrama, it's very verite. But when the elite Laserdisc of Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out in the mid-90s, and they cleaned it up and they showed you, like, not everything is brown in the movie, and there's actual dolly shots. There is legitimate style and craft in that film. It's just that they didn't have any money to, like, push it even further. But it's a very stylish film. But to go from that movie to Poltergeist and to Life Force and to these bigger budget films that clearly show that if given the money and the time, that these filmmakers aren't just kind of resting on the laurels of their do-it-yourself attitudes. Right. They're evolving their style, So, but I don't think that they would have, they wouldn't have gotten where they were if they just said, like, no, something's just going to fall into my lap and I'm going to make it work, and my style is not going to evolve at all. Because you can look at Chris Nolan's Following, and then you can look at Dunkirk or, Tenet, and you can see the same filmmaker in there. It's just the canvases are getting bigger, and it's a matter of really, like, seeing, can this filmmaker be able to command, a much larger scope and budget and a bigger kind of army behind them, even, you know, on a bigger scale or a smaller scale, still the same person, you know. Right. I'm more inspired by those filmmakers that didn't get anything handed to them, that they just said, fuck it. Let's, you know, I got 59 cents and a roll of duct tape. Let's make this work. Yeah. And they did, you know, and then you get to see like, okay, they didn't just stay on that path. They themselves wanted to broaden their horizons or widen their scope, you know, and that to me, that just gave me hope that I could do it as well, even though maybe at the time I was going, well, I got this duct tape and I got this change here, like it's going to make something, right? You know, and then it will lead to, you know, $1.24 and a bigger roll of duct tape, even better, you know?
Yeah. Well, the craft elevates, you know, each time. And that's where it is funny, like someone like Tobe Hooper, you know, I got to see Texas Chainsaw on the big screen, you know, and it was like, oh, it's a really well shot movie. Like Daniel Pearl's cinematography in that movie is crazy. But then, you know, when people talk about Poltergeist, how could the Texas Chainsaw guy do this? I was like, have you seen Life Force? Like that's a gorgeous movie that
I get how people, you know, there was that whole, you know, and it's still this debate today, you know, it's
that could be a whole
podcast. That's not a Tobe Hooper movie. That's a Steven Spielberg movie. You know, like I don't subscribe to that at all, you know, and I've heard people who will vehemently say like, oh no, Steven Spielberg was the director on that set. And then there's people who are like, no, that was totally Tobe Hooper on the set. And you know what? They're both right and they're both wrong, you know, because film is truly a collaborative medium. I don't think Tobe was stupid in thinking that he was making a movie with Steven Spielberg that was designed to be PG, that had a family squarely rooted in the center of the story, that he couldn't take the same visual tics and the same kind of scope approach that he did with Eaten Alive or Texas Chainsaw and apply it to Poltergeist. It was like, you have to pivot, or a good storyteller knows when to do that, not just to go like, I am going to literally force feed my vision, the one that you guys all know me for, you know, all the way up to Funhouse, into this story here. You know, like that's not fair. That's not, like, if anything, that's not good filmmaking. Good filmmaking is when you can watch someone who can easily pivot between Desperado and Spy Kids and go, yeah, that totally makes sense. It's still a Rodriguez film, but he's catering it to a slightly different audience or a different, you know, wheelhouse, or even just, you know, different tastes, if you will. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, you saw James Wan do that. You know, he went from the horror, you know, genre into Fast and the Furious, and did what I think is maybe the best movie in that series. And then Aquaman, and then took that money and did like the most crazy throwback, gory, crazy movie that it is. You know, it's just,
but you can still see, like, even if you look at movies that he's not as well known for, like, I think Death Sentence is fucking amazing. And that movie is 3 years away from being everybody's favorite James Wan movie. I truly believe that. It's like there needs to be that like 7 to 10 year gap between, all right, when, you know, the movie first came out and people were like, from the director of Saw, okay, I guess, you know, I was actually on the promotional tour with Fox around the same time that was coming out, because we were doing Comic-Con together. And I remember one of the Fox executives going like, it's almost like we can't say from the director of Saw, because then people are going to go in there thinking that it's going to be torture porn. And it's really a death wish. It's a different type of movie, you know? And then you watch that movie and go, holy shit, the level of craft involved. But then you can see it's the same exact guy that years later is using the camera in the same way in both Aquaman, where there's that scene where, you know, all the guys in the white armor come into the house and Nicole Kidman's beating the shit out of him and he's swooping the camera around, to the moment in Malignant where Gabriel is taking out everybody in the police station. You know, it's still the same filmmaker. It's just, he's smart enough to know, all right, who is the audience for? You know, can I apply all of my bag of tricks into this particular story? And he's got enough bags, you know, and enough tricks to be able to apply that to everyone, but still make it his own, without forgetting the audience. Because at the end of the day, it is all about the audience, whether you're telling a joke that's going to be for you and your buddies or to 1,000 people or a Netflix special. You have to gauge your audience. You have to know your audience enough. Like recently, I just done a Disney show where, even my mom is like, what? How the fuck did that happen?
Who is this?
Exactly. And, part of the drive for me to do that was I want something my kids can actually watch, for a change and not wait 5 more years before I can show them.
Can they not watch Wrong Turn? Yeah.
Not yet. No. I mean, Remy, my 12-year-old, is very squeamish. Ferris, or Chuck, as he likes to call himself. He's 7. He's already asking me like, okay, break it down for me, Dad. How does Leatherface kill? How does Chucky kill? What murder weapons does Jason use? I'm like, where the fuck are you getting all this shit from? Then again, I can look back at myself and go, how did I know all that stuff when I was 7? So their sensibilities are very different, which I love in a way, but I also know that like they both love, Marvel movies. They both love superhero films because they're kids, and who doesn't? I mean, we're all kids and we all love that shit. So to be able to do something that's in that wheelhouse, that is like, I can actually say like, okay, it's not on Shudder, it's on Disney Plus.
Right.
They're like, wow, Dad, you're a real filmmaker. I thought like you only made crap that was on like those other streaming services. It's like, no. This one, it might have a thumbnail right next to The Simpsons or right next to The Mandalorian. Who knows? But again, that was me being like that. The fun challenge with that one was, again, just taking all of the skills that I have as a filmmaker and in a practical sense, I'm not getting hired purely because the showrunners love my fucked up aesthetic or my weird sense of humor or how I shoot action or how I shoot, set pieces. They also know that I'm good with actors. So that's a practical skill set, or that I enjoy working with actors. I know exactly what I need on set. And if I don't get that on set, then I'm not going to sit there and go, I'm going to my trailer until I get what my vision desires. On TV, you don't have time for that. You have to pivot. You have to, not compromise, but you have to adapt, to anything that's going to come your way, good, bad, or ugly. Raining today, figure something else out. Actors not on set, in time, figure something else out. I'm a good problem solver. So a lot of these very practical skills being applied to a very creative process, that to me, I think is what got me hired for the Disney thing. I mean, also it's very weird to think that like the showrunners were huge fans of Mayhem. That's kind of what started the whole conversation. But then to be in a very big Disney executive meeting and the showrunners are like, oh, here's Joe Lynch. He made one of our favorite fucked up midnight movies. I'm like, that's not the way that you introduced me to.
Like, I'll see myself out.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, here, hold on. I'll Homer Bush gif out of this situation. But the way that they described it, the way that what they were looking for in terms of a director to be able to apply this, because when you're doing what's essentially episodic TV in a way, because there's like 3 or 4 directors on this one project, you're passing the baton, so whoever set and established the style of the show through the pilot, now there has to be a certain sense of consistency. So you have to conform to that a little bit. So all in all, it's the director needs to read the room. And I don't mean that like the room of the set. You need to read the room of the audience. You need to read the room of the, the way that the craft is being made. You don't want to upend the apple cart by going like, I need a techno crane. We've never used a techno crane. I don't care. Have you seen my last 2 films? I had a techno crane on that, and you're going to have to, make that happen. You have to adapt. So it's a matter of just being able to read the room on so many fronts that allows filmmakers to go from, say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre to Poltergeist. Like the fact that Spielberg was such a fan of Texas Chainsaw enough to think, I want that guy to do my family haunted house movie. That takes a lot of balls. But it also, whether you want to say like, was Tobe a good director or a bad director on set? No one will ever know that answer for sure, especially now. But you still have to appreciate that Spielberg and all those guys knew that there was going to be something particular that Tobe was going to bring to the table that I don't think anybody else would have, and that's to me, that's Tobe being a good director. That's Tobe being like the kind of director that can adapt to a situation, somewhat make it his own, but still serve the greater good, which is to deliver a story that is done for the masses,
Yeah. What is that balance of making it your own? Because I interviewed someone who, Michelle Morgan, was on Heartland, and she was starring, then 14 seasons in or whatever it was, then she switches into directing, and you're in an established world. How do you make that your own? How do you put your stamp onto something where there are other things to consider? The audience, you can't make a movie for just yourself.
Well, I mean, it really depends on the content. And I hate even using the word content because it's such an easy thing now that you can look at, Squid Game and, Last Action Hero in the same bucket of thumbnails on Netflix and go like, they're the same thing to someone. Right. Someone's going to go like, oh, that's just Last Action Hero is a two episode limited series as opposed to Squid Game being a 10-hour movie in a way. It's semantics at this point. But when it comes to stuff like that, like in terms of making things your own, I think movies are still under the formula that there is one shaman, right? Like a storyteller that's sitting you around the campfire and is going to tell you this one story, so to speak. And, in a shorter amount of time, which is, now you can look at TV as like essentially what novels are, as opposed to films almost being short stories in a way. Because like, think about it, there's going to be a whole generation of people that are going to be completely used to watching 10 hours of content.
It's crazy.
And 2 hours of content and, kind of judging them on the same realm. Whereas years ago, it was like, no, there was a clear delineated line between films and television.
Literally, now even the early 2000s, there was a clear line of quality between TV.
Even if you look at, like The Sopranos or 6 Feet Under or whatever, it was that they were starting to implement the kind of budgets that made you think that you were watching Goodfellas, not a TV show. Like, oh, wow, there's actual style going into this. Or True Detective, where you can have, a oneer and it just kind of, people go like, oh, yeah, that's there. Instead of going, whoa. Yeah, exactly. Like we're now expecting that kind of production value. When it comes to putting your stamp on things, I think movies allow you to do that more because you're again telling as the cinematic shaman, you're telling something in a shorter form, and you're not having to rely on other filmmakers as well that are going to have very subjective opinions on where they're going to put the camera, how they're going to talk to the actors, edit beats, how you execute, certain gags, an overall tone on set that can obviously affect the output that you get from your cast and your crew. When you have a shorter burst of creativity like that in films, I think people are more focused on that short amount of time that you have together in that circle. Whereas with TV, it can be anything from 6 hours to 6 years worth of content. And that's where, I think the terminology of where, like, who's the author in a way changes a little bit purely because of workflow. There is the showrunner or showrunners. And, that they're the ones who are there that are taking all of the, because if you think about it, like when a director is on set on a feature film, they have a second unit director, sometimes a third unit director, that you have to convey your style, the way that you want it to be presented or executed. You have to convey that to them, and it becomes a game of telephone. And then hopefully when all that stuff comes back, it's what you saw in your head. With TV, in a way, the showrunner is, to me, like, and now that I've worked with enough TV to know like what the pecking order is, And I love working in TV because you have this. The showrunner is essentially the director in a way, like in the same breath that a director would be the voice in a feature film. And every director that goes out and does, blocks or episodes is just another unit. And it's all about communication. So, if you're conveying, how you want a particular shot or how you want like a certain story beat presented, you just have to be incredibly clear to whoever is going to exact that. To me, it's all about communication. So when you're putting your stamp on things, whether it's you're doing it in script form, where you're making sure that the dialogue or the character beats or even the story beats are serving their purpose for the greater good, but also to like those little those little spice moments that you get when there's that perfect symbiosis of the actor and the camera and everything else around it, making people feel comfortable enough to be able to create something off the page. Those little moments are created by chemistry, and they're created by whoever it is, whether it's the director on the feature film or the showrunners on the TV show. They're the ones who are part of putting all these people together to hopefully create something for the greater good. So, like when it comes to, say, for example, all right, so in the last year, I've worked on a lot of TV, which is great. I mean, fuck, man, I'm working. It's a great feeling to be able to have, feature films in development right now, or possibly about to go in one case. But, you want to stay frosty because there's nothing worse than being a director and not being on set, because you feel like you get used to the butterflies in your stomach when you're going to set going, oh my God, I have to talk to 200 people today. It gets easier every time you do it, and every day that you do it, and every project that you can do makes it easier to tackle many of the challenges that come your way. And there are many.
Yeah.
So in one respect, I did Creepshow, and now with Creepshow, that was an anthology. And one of the things that I think was really smart on Greg's and the producers' end was that, you have the IP of Creepshow. When you say the word Creepshow, in most cases, people are going to know what you're going for, whether it's the macabre kind of feeling from Stephen King with that little hint of humor, that satirical kind of morality tale that Romero brought to the first one, and even Gornick in the second one. Creepshow established itself and a formula. After that, Greg being the showrunner, he knew when he was getting all these stories what he was basically going for. So the scripts, by the time they got to the directors, were somewhat fully formed pieces of material that reflected the IP. Now the exciting part is, what's David Bruckner going to bring to the table? What's Tom Savini going to bring to the table? What's Roxanne Benjamin going to bring to the table? What's Rob Schraub going to bring to the table? That really got exciting for people. And at the same time, like now, I can look back at this, and I mean, that's kind of what I thought when I heard about the project. Like, what could I bring to the table for Creepshow, knowing that, also Creepshow was such a definitive quote unquote IP in my life. And it was so important to me as a little kid. And even now it established a lot of who I am as a filmmaker and my sensibilities, like the tone of it, even just the style sometimes. What could I do in that form? And I can look back now and go, I got incredibly lucky because I had 4 wildly different stories. Pipe Screams is a Eurotrash, 90s, sleaze fest. The Right Snuff is an idealized 60s sci-fi retro throwback. Familiar is, like a 70s paranoid thriller a la Polanski. And Meter Reader is George Miller by way of Danny Boyle and Sergio Corbucci. You can't get any more different. And and maybe that'll shoot me in the foot for future TV, because people are going to go like, well, what is his style? Yeah. But I think you can look at all 4 of those and easily pick out quote unquote Joe Lynch moments, because of if you've seen the stuff that I've done in the past, kind of what I like to do with the camera, what I like to do with the actors, what I like to do with gags. But to have 4 wildly different stories, and then for all of them to still at the same time feel like Creepshow, that to me is testament to like what Nicotero was going for, where it's like he can have these scripts that feel like George and Steven and, you know, even Savini kind of put their seal of approval on it before it even goes out, and then see what other directors who might have been influenced by Creepshow in the past, or maybe don't even know what the fuck Creepshow was, what they're going to bring to the table. And that's where you can, quote unquote, put your stamp on it. Now, that said, you also have to make your days. You also have to work with a very limited budget and very limited time. And look, truth be told, not every director was cut out for that. You know, that show in particular was grueling at times, because it was, all right, you have to reset and create a whole new world in 3 days. I mean, it was more a testament to the amazing production designer and all the art department people that they could basically hit the reset button and make a whole new story. Because the thing with TV that kept costs down was they had consistency sets. There was the living room. There was the police station. There was the interrogation room. There was the morgue. There were all these sets that they could go back to in subsequent episodes, that there wasn't a new build. It was already there. It was standing sets. You could easily just kind of go like, all right, we're going to go to that set now, not go, all right, when is the set done? Like, that was the hardest part with the first block of Creepshow. I'm sorry if I'm going all over the place, but you got me going. But with Creepshow, the second season, the first that I had done, Pipe Screams was an easier starting off point, because they actually retrofitted a bunch of sets from the previous episode to make our apartment, our bathroom, and our basement. So these were sets that were already standing that they just completely redressed, and I mean, God bless them that they were able to do that so deftly. Right Snuff, that was a brand new set. That was the way that we designed it, it was supposed to look like something that Kubrick and Saul Bass came up with in 1968.
Sure. And
the fact that they were able to do that, but we ended up having to push a day because the sets weren't done. So that, I hope that no one saw that, but I lost 6 or 7 shots because of that decision. Now, You'd never know it, hopefully, but it's that kind of domino effect that can completely affect how you are going to present the story to the audience ultimately.
Right. Well,
but what's funny though is that right after I was finished with Right Snuff, I saw the episode, I think that played the week after, and they had completely used the Right Snuff set for John Harrison's Lovecraft episode the week later. I'm like, sons of bitches.
You saved them a day.
Damn it. Yeah, exactly. If anything, that worked out great for them, because now I gave John Harrison an extra day because he didn't have to worry about waiting a day for another set. It's all checks and balances when it comes to TV. But I think that in the end, you being able to put your quote unquote stamp on things is more a testament to how you can work a set, work with people, because you're still you're still the same person problem solving on a feature film as opposed to a TV or a commercial or a music video. You're still, whether you know it or not, you're still putting that camera or envisioning the way a moment is executed in a way that I don't think anyone else would be able to do. And I'm talking to you, filmmaker out there. That's just how it's almost subliminal. Yeah. It's just how are you able to acclimate that workflow in a way that won't get you fired because you're sitting there going I need my 6-minute oneer, because if you saw my last 2 films, I had oneers. That's the best filmmakers are the ones that can almost do it deceptively, and you won't even know it, because if you can look at Cary Fukunaga's work in True Detective, to me, that's not upon first glance, that's not the same filmmaker that did Sin Nombre, but you look at it deeper and further, you go, oh no, it is. It's just it's a different story. It's a different forum, probably different budgets and different people behind the scenes, like giving him push and pull. So at the end, though, it's still the same person calling action. It's still the same person calling cut, and still the same person picking those shots to put in there ultimately. So that's how you put your stamp on it is, if anything, you doing you in whatever form you're in. It just depends on, the people that you surround yourself in, the environment that you're putting yourself in.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can definitely see it watching through your filmography. Like there's you in Wrong Turn 2, where you had no control over the script, and you're just showing how you are going to shoot it. You're putting your visual stamp on it. And then also when you look at movies like, where you're making Spartacus references in your buddy cop, movie like that, to me, like, that's like, oh, that's a Joe Lynch thing. Like that call out. I was like, there's not a lot of filmmakers who would be putting a Spartacus reference in this moment. That's uniquely you.
But even like, it's funny that you mentioned that about Wrong Turn 2. I had a lot more creative leeway in Wrong Turn 2, because it seemed like if you put everybody into a room together, it seemed like I was the only one that knew enough about horror movies to know what worked and what didn't. Mm-hmm. So but it wasn't like I was pushing myself into that situation. They just saw wow, he made a Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter reference. And I remember that movie. And I do remember that one part with the machete. And that's really interesting. Like, what else do you have to say about that matter, Joe? I didn't go like, it's my way or the highway.
Right.
It was more that I organically proved that, like, I was a bit of an expert on the genre at the time, especially splatter films. And I knew what I thought worked right. Like, perfect example of that is the opening scene when Kimberly gets split in half. When I referenced and even showed a clip from Dead Alive. Now, Dead Alive, if you remember, in the beginning of the film with the Sumerian monkey rat, when the archaeologist he gets bit and the tribal members are like cutting off arms and legs, and he's going Zingaya, and then it cuts to the one last cut, and then it cuts to black, and it cuts to the title card. And I'll never forget reading the original script for Wrong Turn 2, and essentially that's what happens to Kimberly's character. Also, Kimberly's character was not supposed to be Kimberly Caldwell, so I thought, like, at the time, why not go meta and cast a person as herself to really throw the stakes off? So the combination of having a real person getting killed and then saying to the producers and the executives, like, okay, I think everybody, and maybe half the people in the room knew what Dead Alive was. They knew Peter Jackson, but they weren't sure what Dead Alive was. But enough knew, like, oh, it's supposed to be this crazy, outrageous, wildly disgusting movie, but done tongue in cheek. I was like, all right, now imagine watching that moment in Dead Alive and going, oh man, because you wanted to see that moment. If anything, Peter Jackson set you up for seeing that moment. And then he cuts to the title card, which is fine, because then you get the next 80 minutes of pure madness. And you're going, okay,
he gives you the goods later
slide.
on.
Yeah, he gets you later on.
Party's over.
But here I was like, if I'm going to get the audience now, we have to take that part further. So being able to, politely and maturely explain, I think we need to show that. And then have storyboards like that showed it explicitly, and everything on the storyboards is in that scene. Mm-hmm. But also showing them, like, look, here's how you do it right. Here's how I think we should do it better. And by communicating that with people in a studio, mind you, like, even though it was direct to video, it was still Fox, and they were very conservative about it. It helped that at the time, unrated DVDs were huge. So they were just like, look, if you can make your day, shoot it all, we'll make it into a special feature later on. Great. But it was a matter of making everyone feel inclusive to be able to get those choices made. Like with Point Blank, the fact that they're in the ugliest car possible in that, like in a car chase scene, which was an orange PT Cruiser with the wood paneling. Like the whole point of that movie was to somewhat emasculate those two characters. And I thought, if we're going to do a car chase scene, let's do it in a car that no one would expect, because everybody expects, cool, fast 68 Hemi Cuda, like they're just going to find one, jump, slide over the hood, and everyone's badass again. And my point was, let's subvert that. Let's, like we have our hero is in purple. He's a nurse to start with. And our other quote unquote hero is injured half the movie. Mm-hmm. So already we're kind of setting things up to, like, based on the script, we're setting things up to be subversive and try something a little different. So I was like, well, then why not have, references to, Metal Gear Solid, and they're talking about video games, or what if we had them in a PT Cruiser, just to try to shake things up a little bit. That's for me, that's always been my thing. Like I feel like I've seen enough movies to know what's fun when you're seeing something a little different. Not trying to, reinvent the wheel, just something where you go, I appreciate that you went, like you zigged instead of zagged.
Right.
You're still getting to the same point. You're still getting to the same finish line. But if you could take the road less traveled in a way, like if you can be like in Death Proof where they go up the hill instead of the straight line, mm-hmm. they'll be able to sucker punch you by T-boning you on the side when you least expect it. You're still going to get to the same spot, but I would much rather kind of take a PT Cruiser route than your typical, like, oh man, look at that cool car that they're in. You're going to forget about that car in 30 seconds. But if you're sitting there going, how the fuck is a PT Cruiser going 70 miles an hour? They might not make it out of this, because I've been in a PT Cruiser. My grandmother owns a PT Cruiser, and I know those things do not last very long, in the trenches. So that's how I feel like I can make a mark by doing by making choices and kind of presenting ideas that you normally wouldn't expect without upending the apple cart, without, trying to completely change things. Because again, we still have to get to the finish line. Mm-hmm. It's just, let's take a slightly different route.
Yeah. I got to ask before we move into our last round here, you talked about getting butterflies in your stomach, going to go talk to 200 people on a set, and it's still there, even though now it's getting less and less. But I have to imagine someone who grew up devouring Fangoria and watching all these movies, you just mentioned working on Creepshow, and you helped John Harrison make his day. Greg Nicotero is the showrunner for that show. Like, how sick to your stomach the first time you start working with people who were so impactful to you? Like, that's a lot of responsibility, because you feel like you're helping now, carry that, you're part of that legacy in a crazy way. No pressure.
It's if you let it get to you, it can affect your work. Because there's that old adage, fake it till you make it. At this point in my career, like, I feel like I can step on a set and not want to throw up completely, not be like Willie Beeman in Any Given Sunday, where I'm just like, just throwing up on the field. But I if you lose that ability to be nervous on set, to me, it just means you don't care. That happened to me one time on a project. I'm not going to say what it was. It wasn't a feature. It was a very small project, but I kind of walked on set during this thing and didn't give a shit. I shouldn't say that. It's not that I didn't give a shit. I wasn't nervous. And that scared me. I walked off that set going, shouldn't I be nervous about this? Shouldn't I have the butterflies in my stomach? And it just showed me, and I think that this is like true for every filmmaker. If you care, you're going to care about the smallest little detail, because at the end of the day, that small little detail is part of your visual gesticulation. Mm-hmm. Like when you see a great comic and they have like the perfect pause, or they do something with their hand, that becomes part of their routine that people will see and remember and love you, or love what you're doing with that. So if you're sweating all the small stuff, to me, it shows you care. Now, you don't have to be a Kubrickian auteur asshole and be like, that pebble is not the right, or no. When in Ali, I remember reading a story about how Michael Mann got pissed during like the Thrilla in Manila fight because someone had a belt that wasn't indicative of the time. It was like a 90s belt instead of a 70s belt. And he stopped production. It's like, great story. Love it. I'm not gonna lose precious minutes. No, and you know what? Sometimes filmmakers, you know, that's just their thing. But if you don't care to the point where, you know, like I was saying before, like, you know, filmmaking can become a game of telephone at times. What you convey to the DP and the first AD and the producers and the screenwriter, whatever, is now going to filter down into all the various departments, all the way down to the driver, knowing that he's got to be there at 11:45 to pick up the actor because it's going to take them an extra 45 minutes to get into makeup to be on set on time for you to get your first take. And if that driver is late or doesn't give a shit or got the wrong information, that means that actor is going to be 15 minutes later or 30 or whatever. It's going to take them longer to get into makeup. Now the makeup people are freaking out because now they're rushing, and now the makeup's not going to be as good. And now that person who's going to be on set is pissed off because everyone in the room was freaking out, and that can kind of throw people off. And now they're on set 15 minutes later, and now you have to try to get, now you can only get one take instead of 6 or 2 takes instead of 6. And that's going to directly affect your end product.
Sure.
And that sucks, you know, like, so if you care that much and you have those butterflies in your stomach, but you do it in a way that is conducive for everyone feeling like they're contributing, you know, like they're part of the process in a good way, it all filters up. It all makes you feel like we're all contributing to the greater good. Now, that said, when you're collaborating with people like, you know, John Harrison and Greg Nicotero, or, you know, even people like, you know, Henry Rollins and Wrong Turn 2, when you're a huge Black Flag and Rollins band fan, and you're on set telling Rollins, like, okay, you know, the mutant's going to throw his axe and you're going to, you know, dip and weave, and then you're going to punch the shit out of him. And he's going, copy that, sir. Got it. Good. You know, and you're going, did Henry Rollins just call me sir?
Yeah, right.
What the hell is going on here? You have to, you just got to play it cool. You know, like there's a difference, like I said before, about like faking it until you make it. It's stifling down the butterflies and just showing that you're almost going like, oh my God, I'm working with these people. This is insane. And that's happened to me many times. I mean, you know, the first time that I worked with Salma, you know, which we didn't have the best relationship because I think she just did not know the kind of movie she was making at first, but then it evolved into something really great. And she's awesome in the movie, but I was still incredibly intimidated when it's like one of the most beautiful actors in the world, you know, a fantastic actor in her own right, especially after like, you know, the last couple of movies she had done at that point. I was incredibly intimidated, especially when she can also say like, baby, I'm so rich, I could shut down this production, you know, today,
right,
and give everybody and pay everybody off, and I can go to Montenegro for the weekend if I really wanted to. And you're just like, go. You want to make sure that, you know, you don't show your nervousness, because then it to some people it can be considered weakness, and they can take advantage of that. So. You know, it's tough, but you just have to stay the course and just try to act as cool as possible, and know and make everyone think you know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in the spirit of making our day, we have 3 minutes. I have 5 quick, rapid questions I want to ask you. First,
we can go a little further. We can go a little longer. I'm okay.
Okay, cool. Number 1, which of your films do you think is the best representation of you as a creator?
I would say Mayhem, and mainly because that was one that was probably at this point my most personal film because of everything that happened before it. It's funny, I just watched it recently, and I can see like, you know, it was one of my lowest budget films, but I still feel like it's such a reflection of what I am able to do.
That's crazy to me, canvas. Because it feels like the biggest, I'd say Point Blank feels probably the biggest budget, which I don't know if it was because it was Netflix related, but I know.
No, it was like Point Blank was definitely the biggest budget. That was 12. But if you consider like how much the producers and the stars got. Like I think at the end I had like 7 to actually make the film, which is fine.
Yeah.
But it was definitely the biggest budget, yet I can look at that and go like that one was beset by a lot more compromises that were above my pay grade more than anything else. Whereas Mayhem, I like, if anything, that one felt like the most like I had final cut, which I kind of did in a way. Like I was playing ball with the producers, but in the end, the cut that Josh and I delivered was as close to what we wanted from the beginning,
No, Mayhem looks freaking amazing. It looks like a huge movie, but it speaks to your talent as director to be able to bring that scale to something where there is, you are limited in what you can do, especially with like stuff like action where you're like trying to choreograph stuff and make it look cool. It's
watching again 2 days ago and like sitting there and doing like a running commentary talking about like, oh wow, we only had 4 hours for that moment. Whereas that's something that I think, I'm trying to remember. Oh, all right. So one of my greatest achievements ever was having dinner with, and sorry for the name drop, but having dinner with Tarantino a couple months ago and finding out that he was a huge fan of Everly. And which already blew my mind. He's like, all right, tell me, how many days did you have to shoot that film?
Which is crazy because that one to me feels the most like a Tarantino movie.
Oh, well, it definitely was, but I told him, I was like, I had 24 days. And he's like, wow. What? Oh man, now I love that movie even more, man. I had 81 days or something like that just to do the final scene in Kill Bill 1. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's crazy, right? Yeah. But like the fact that you can have someone who I consider like a hero to be able to recognize the craft that went into what I was trying to do, like that just blew me away.
Yeah, after you regain consciousness, that probably feels pretty good,
But I think like even looking at exactly like when I had to pick my jaw off the ground and like go like, did you really say that? But even with like Everly, like all the films that I've done in one form or another have been very personal. I've been lucky enough that I've been able to make, for the most part, things that are a reflection of me at the time. So I look at Everly now and I can see, because, the whole movie is about someone who is trying to fight their way out of a box, essentially. And I was in such an angry place after Nights of Badassdom. When I wrote Everly and it got on the blacklist and then got sold, that was in the middle of a post on Nights of Badassdom. So I already had the idea of like, all right, I want this Dogma 95 style film where it has very set rules and, can I actually make Die Hard in a room? Because that's how we saw it. But then the production side of it was insane and it was very difficult, but in a good way. Like, I can look back and say that now. At the time, I'm like, oh God, I'm never going to make movies again. But I can look at that and say that is an artist shooting their way out of being confined, because that's how I felt like on Nights of Badassdom. Because of the budget, because of the producers and the restrictions that they gave us, I felt like I was very claustrophobic. I was being squished into this box. And Everly is me shooting my way out of that box, literally shooting my way out of that box. Gotcha. So, yeah, look, every filmmaker who's listening to this, I hope that you all get as lucky as I've been, where I can look back at every one of the movies that I've done and say that without a doubt, and I'm sure that every filmmaker does this to a degree, has this connection with the art that they're creating. But I can look at Wrong Turn 2 and Nights of Badassdom and Everly and Mayhem and Point Blank and Chillerama and Truth in Journalism and even the TV stuff that I've done, and see me at that point, or what that movie represents. Like Wrong Turn 2 is the 12-year-old in me, with every Fangoria spread out on my bed and everything, going, someday I'm going to make a splatter movie. And that's what that is. Yeah. So, it's Mayhem is definitely the one where I go, I love how this was a lightning round. Mayhem is the one where it's like the culmination of all that.
Sure.
It was also the one that, that had the least amount of money, but I can look at it and go like, I felt like I was most myself there. So yeah, that's my long-winded answer.
Gotcha. What is a movie that your diehard fans would be surprised that you enjoy?
You mean not of my own?
Yeah.
All right. I guess, it's funny because if you go on my Letterboxd,
which I do frequently, I stalked the Letterboxd this morning. In the Line of Fire is a great movie. I got excited when I saw you had revisited that.
My girlfriend might know more about movies than I do, which is terrifying that I would ever meet someone that like is more encyclopedic than I am. But she's definitely opened my eyes up to movies that I just haven't either watched before or have, just talked about, or rediscovered. Like we went to go see La Strada, Fellini's La Strada at the New Art last weekend. It's like last time I watched that, I had to get graded on it. So I've been opening up my world a lot more to movies that might not have been in my wheelhouse. Because, when you start out as a filmmaker, you're wearing your influences on your sleeve. And a lot of times, especially in like the whole Splat Pack era, like 10 years ago, it was all about like, what movies do you love? And, that would be like your connector to your fans. The one movie that I would definitely say that I've had more people shocked that I love is Defending Your Life. Albert Brooks' Defending Your Life.
I haven't seen it. I'm writing down a note to watch it right now.
Let me implore you, how much genius is captured in this film. I'm not going to go on forever about it, but it's essentially Albert Brooks plays a version of himself in a way, like plays like an Albert Brooks character who dies, and in the rules of his heaven or purgatory, he has to basically go on trial to either go to heaven to ascend into the upper realms or get shipped back to earth and do it all over again. Gotcha. It's magic. It's absolute magic. But it's a very light film. Meryl Streep's in it. She's amazing. Rip Torn's in it. Right.
She's always amazing. Yeah.
But she's amazing and she's fucking hilarious. And this was at the point where she was still Dingo Ate My Baby and, like doing all like the Out of Africas. She wasn't known for her almost slapstick in a way. She's magical. It's on Criterion Disc right now. I highly recommend it. Other movies. Somebody recently gave me not shit, but they were like a little shocked. I think it was on the set of the Disney show that I loved. Jonathan Demme's Something Wild. And I don't see why anyone would have an issue with that at all, because if you know that movie, yeah, you look at the poster and go like quirky 80s comedy, but then the last 20 minutes is a straight up fucking horror movie with Ray Liotta as
a little Silence of the Lambs precursor there.
Oh my God. Yeah, that movie's fucking terrifying at the end. But I can look at that movie and go, that is so much a quote unquote Joe Lynch type movie, because I like tonal roller coasters. I don't like when a movie, as long as the script is servicing this and you have characters that care about these kind of tonal shifts, I like a movie that will have tonal augments. I like where, you can start a movie off and you think that you're watching a comedy and next thing you know, it's a horror movie. Because that's life. Life is not, is not a comedy every day. It's not a drama every day. It's not an action film every day. They're all of those things. So if you can have a movie that can actually do the same thing and still engage the audience, that's magic to me.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's what I loved about, I watched After Hours for the first time, and it to me, that's the definitive tonal roller coaster, because you're laughing 1 second and then you're so deeply uncomfortable the next second. And then sometimes you don't know which one you're supposed to be.
When you're Griffin Dunn and like 5 minutes before, he's traversing through this club that you don't have any clue about, but it's like, haha, that's funny. He's a fish out of water. And next thing you know, he's getting his head shaved and it's a fucking nightmare. Oh God, I love that.
Yeah. What is the best decade of film history?
Oh man, that's a tough one. And again, I think part of my recent like binging of just all cinema has really opened my eyes up to films of the 40s, films of the 50s. Another movie that I don't think fans would be wouldn't think is definitely one of my favorite movies, but Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, the musical. Fucking love that movie. So good. But again, it's not, no one dies.
Right.
It's light and fluffy and beautifully, lens. Not that I like dirty looking movies, but I do like a lot of dirty movies too. I'm so
That's my next question. So we'll get there. No.
We'll get there. What was the question again?
What's the best decade of film history?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I personally, and I know Quentin would like roll in his supposed grave right now.
Oh no, you're gonna say 50s.
No. He says the 80s is the worst decade of film, but I would disagree. For me personally, living through, and I think this is kind of important to any filmmaker who has like a stake in like what their favorite decade is, because it's easy to say the 70s, because the 70s was that wonderful crossroads where the young hippies took over and the film brats took over, and we went from Dr. Dolittle to Easy Rider. There was this like convergence of both art and commerce that really exploded in the 70s, where you can have everything from the French Connection to Halloween, or like there was just, everything was kind of coming to a head in a great way. The 80s took that sensibility and it became more about, I don't want to say product, but it became more of a cottage cinema.
Yeah, it was very commercialized. Yeah.
But what was great about that was that you had an avenue for filmmakers like Tobe Hooper to step into a studio system and make something that, he started out in the 70s as being, like a rebel filmmaker. And then that rebel filmmaker got to, augment himself into the 80s and make, a studio film, or, all the cheesy shit that really inspired me as a little kid, like Dead Heat, like the Treat Williams, Joe Piscopo classic, all the stuff that like Corman was doing with New World, or, Troma was coming up at the time. So you had, but at the same time, you also had Jonathan Demme was going from Corman to making something wild. You had Jim Jarmusch being able to grab a camera and start making stuff like Down by Law, and then Mystery Train. There was this, like, again, a very commercialized sensibility with film in the 80s. And it allowed you to have a slickness, but there was still open avenues for independence. And, that independent cinema sensibility, exploded in the 90s, where now it was the tides have turned, where now it's all the indie films that were like the cool kids in the back of the bus in the 80s are now sitting in the front of the popular kids. And the studio movies are the ones going like, I want to be one of the weirdos, which is totally cool. So I'm going to go with the 80s only because, I'm a fucking nostalgist in a way, where like, because that's where I grew up, and most of my favorite movies kind of stem from that. And those are the movies that really, I guess, formulated my DNA when it comes to film. So it's such a tough question, because now I'm going, but the 90s were great, man.
Right.
Like,
it's hard to be objective about it, and I get Tarantino's point about like the later end of the 80s, it started getting super sanitized. The MPAA was really going crazy. He calls it 50s part 2, like that's the 50s and 80s. But if you look at the early 80s and like the end of the 70s, like that's a beautiful period of time. But it is hard to be objective, because, this is what I always get into trouble talking about horror, because like my introduction was the Platinum Dunes remake. So like I have a huge affinity for the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I have a huge affinity for,
I don't trust anyone who does not like the remake of Texas Chainsaw.
It's amazing. It's a great movie, and it sent me back to the 70s to watch the original.
It was respectful enough that allowed you to be able to go back to what Tobe and Kim and all those guys were making in that sweaty fucking house back in the day, and go, this is just another version of that type of story, but give that to Marcus Nispel.
And Pearl cinematography again, taking his skill. Yeah.
And see the evolution. I mean, that to me is the most fascinating thing about those two films, is that you can see one cinematographer like breaking rules and doing things with the camera that should, I mean, the whole fucking
shot to the back of the head. Yeah.
You know? But then you go like the shot from the under the bench in the first one, and then the shot to the back of the head in the remake. It's like, you know, we had Dan Pearl on the podcast a couple of years ago, and just to pick that guy's brain is because what people don't remember is that in between Texas, you know, the original, and Texas, Texas 03, Dan Pearl became one of the biggest music video cinematographers in the world. That's how he got the gig. But the rumor is that Marcus had no clue that he shot the first Texas Chainsaw.
That's so funny.
Which is fascinating. But look, everyone's got a different gateway into genre, especially horror. And I never disrespect that. Like whenever you hear like, oh, what's the movie, like what's the horror movie that got you into it? And you know, if someone said The Hitcher, the remake of The Hitcher, I can't fault them for that. You know, like I don't like that movie. Like I love Dave Meyers and I love the original Hitcher. But if you're gonna compare it to the one that, you know, Robert Harmon did back in '86, it's just a different way of storytelling in a way.
Yeah, well, everybody's gateway is different, and I think there's nothing. It's why the remake conversation. I love remakes because they do send people back to check out what was that. You know, what was that original film?
You have the original to fall back on. You know, and this is something that I kind of subscribed to early on in Twitter, because I could tell that people would get very volatile. Like when I first jumped onto Twitter and back all the way back in 2009, I just enjoyed starting conversations with people. Was that a Leatherface glass?
Yes, I'm on brand.
Right. You know, when
it's actually sponsored by Daniel Pearl. That's why we mentioned him on the show.
No, perfect. But the pearl necklace. But when I got on Twitter at first, I just enjoyed starting conversations with people and would like throw out every Sunday morning at 12. I would just go top 3 De Palma movies go, or top 3 Giallo films go, and just to have people talking about movies. And every once in a while, that conversation would turn toxic, whether it was, oh, you like that movie, or you've never seen this, and people would be like dicks about it. And I just remember going, look, and at this point, I only made one movie, which was Wrong Turn 2, and I felt like at that point, I was never allowed to say something bad about someone else's movie, because you could easily throw it back to me. I'm the guy that made Wrong Turn 2. So, you know, any criticisms that I have on stuff, like that could be taken with a grain of salt, because, well, I made the movie where a girl gets cut in half and entrails fall out of her vagina in the first 5 minutes. So who am I to judge? But I tried to stay positive about cinema. I don't like to be on, and if you follow me, you probably know this, I don't like to shit on movies. I don't like to be overly critical with movies, because we've all been there, you know, like there's nothing worse. It's so easy to be like, fuck that movie, it's the worst film of all time. Yeah, you know, from the person who probably wishes they made fucking movies,
right,
and didn't go into the, you know, step into the fire like we had to, and have that pressure cooker and have that gun to your head going, you know, you've wanted this your entire life. Now you have to just get through 6 pages and try to get everything that you need, because you're not coming back to this moment ever, or this location ever again. So it's all in, and you put that pressure on yourself, and for it to be so easily dismissed by some ding dong on Twitter to be like, worst movie ever, you suck, I hope you die. It's like, no one needs that kind of negative.
Right.
You know?
That's what's cool about this show is, and this random round is way too long, but you know, that's one of the things I really love about doing this show is like talking to people. You know, I was preparing for a guest, you know, and I was, when you know you're going to be talking to someone who's put the time and you're starting to know like the story behind the movie that they made, you start watching movies going like, this is a great movie, you know, like setting aside like all of the restrictions they had, or maybe that CGI doesn't look so good in this moment, you know, but it's like you have this new level of respect for any movie that gets made. Like there's a baseline respect for like they actually made it, you know.
When I like my biggest thing, and this is why like when I first started out, I worked at Trauma, and I remember having this like feeling about Lloyd and the Toxic Avenger. I remember thinking like, if you know, I had so much respect that they even just got that movie made. You know, it's like, congratulations. And once you make a movie, you have all the respect in the world for other filmmakers and how hard it is to make a movie, or even just to get to that set, or to get it finished, or to get it out to audiences and it's not sitting on, you know, on some shelf somewhere.
Right.
Every battle is a huge one. So, you know, for me, I'm always of the mind of like, we have to just pick each other up and keep championing each other.
Yeah.
Like, whether it's in podcast form, whether it's, you know, on Letterboxd or whatever, like, I hate, God, there's nothing worse than watching it, like, especially like a new movie and going like, oh God, I really did not like that, but I gotta say something on Letterboxd because I want to watch. So at the very least, any bad reviews that I've ever had of anything, I'll at least go like, I love the score.
Yeah.
You know, and then you can read between the lines, but to sit there and like pick apart a movie like that, it's like, it doesn't do anybody any favors. All like, I would much rather be a champion for other people's work and, or, you know, not my own, but my own tastes and what I like out of movies as opposed to like what I don't, because at the end of the day, like we don't, mind you, there might be a few people that might not subscribe to this idea, but at the end of the day, I don't think there's anyone out there that watches movies deliberately to hate them. There's some people that do, but for the most part, that's why it's called entertainment. We are, you know, like, I think we all go into this going, I want to be swept away. I want to be affected. I want to laugh. I want to cry. I want to scream. I want to yell. I want to shout, but I want to forget about the rest of my world for a little bit. And I'm doing this in a positive way. I want, like, even if you want to watch Cannibal Holocaust or whatever, not that you can say like, I want to put myself in a better mood. Let's put on a Serbian film. You know, like I still feel like cinema is an art to elicit endorphins of positivity, you know, or even if you see something disturbing like Hereditary or Midsummer or, you know, Salo or what have you, or come and see.
So funny because I've been on an Italian cannibal movie run for the last like 2 days. So it's funny that that's your go-to.
You know,
but yeah,
like even then you are trying to be affected in a way where you can even like walk away from Cannibal Ferox and like shake it off, go, woohoo, boy, oh boy, I'm so glad that I'm here and not in the jungle right now. It's like you're idealizing your own life by watching some grim shit if need be, you know, and be able to go like, well, now I get to step away from that, you know. And yes, life is a little bit better and the roses are a little bit redder and the grass is a little greener. Thank God that I'm not like, I don't have a fucking wood pole stuck up my ass. So I'm good there, you know. So I've always just, I want to always champion film and I'm always rooting for every filmmaker, you know, out there. Because I've been there too, you know, and I know how hard it is to make a movie. And I, like you were saying, especially when you're talking to someone, you do appreciate what they're going for. And you know what? They know that CG effect sucks too. Yeah.
They're telling themselves.
Believe me, there are things that, you know, people like in my movies that I'm like, no. I have an entire movie called Knights of Badassdom.
Yeah, people love.
I fucking love that movie. And I'm like, yeah. I used to subscribe to, here, do you have 45 minutes? Let me tell you everything that fucked up on that movie. Now, who am I to judge? Like, those people are bringing something completely different to the table. Like, they don't, like, they're not.
They don't have your baggage.
They don't have baggage. They don't know the context. They're just watching this goofy movie with Steve Zahn and Peter Dinklage and Ryan Kwanten and Summer Glau and Jimmy Simpson that they've seen from other TV shows or whatever. They're LARPing. They have fake fucking swords and they're having a good time. If they didn't know any of the trials and tribulations that I went through on this, none the wiser, you know, but you know, it's everyone brings something different to the table. And I want to just continue to champion that.
Right. With that in mind, and maybe this was kind of your answer, but what's the best piece of advice you would give to an aspiring filmmaker? It probably could be to just champion others' work, but
I'll be very like weirdly practical. Know everyone's name on your set, whether you have 5 people or 50 or 500. If you know everyone's name and you can say good morning to Phil and Bob and Janet, and I've been there on sets where I wasn't the director.
Yeah.
And when the director, who is, still kind of at the end of the day, the leader, of the team, they're the ones who are forging everything ahead. At least they should be, or they should kind of take that responsibility. When your captain says good morning to you in a workflow that most people don't expect that, it goes a long way. I learned this very valuable advice on my own I think it was on Everly. After, again, I had just been beaten down and I hated myself. I hated everybody. Not I hated everybody around me, but I hated that it felt like it was me versus, the world. I hated that there was a language barrier because we shot it in Serbia. So I started this thing where every weekend I would write a letter to the crew, and it would go out to the cast and the crew on Sunday night before the next day's shoot. And it would just be as simple as, hey, everybody, we're doing this. Great job. It's like, man, it was tough this week or whatever. But I would write this little letter. And I've done it ever since Everly. And, what's shocking to me, and I just did this again on all the TV shows and everything, you do not know how important and powerful that can be because people don't expect it. And that blows my mind. I can't believe that more directors don't do this.
Yeah.
They don't personalize the experience and make everyone feel like they are part of the collaboration. It's not, the above the line versus the below the line. It should be, we're all in this together. Recently when I was on the Disney show in New Orleans, and I would park with the rest of the crew, not deliberately, it was mostly just because I couldn't find my parking spot. And I just said, fuck it, I'm just going to park over here in the grass with everybody else. And 2 or 3 times crew members were like, oh, I'm sorry, Joe, your parking spot is over there. Why are you parking with us? I'm like, we're all in this together. I don't see the difference between me and you and whoever else. We all have a job. We got hired to be here. We're all doing it together. We all have to be kind of collaborative in that respect. So why should I be any different from you? And the guy's like, that's incredibly socialist. I respect that. And I'm like, yeah, hey, man.
Man of the people. Yeah.
But in the end, just because it says a Joe Lynch film or directed by Joe Lynch or whatever, I wouldn't get what I need without that guy, without that girl, without everybody working together. So things like knowing everybody's name, and where you can say good night or good morning with their name attached to it. And doing things like writing a letter to, or just a little personal note to everybody. That is the difference between you making your day sometimes and not making your day sometimes.
Yeah.
Because there was every single production, at least once, there's a day where it's like the day got away from you and you got to leave the location. You got to get those shots before you go. And there are certain productions where the crew members can just drop cable and say, hasta lasagna, see ya, we're out of here, or go, you know what? He was so nice to me, or she was really cool to me, and never made me feel like an asshole, or it was just like, I want to give them the extra 5 minutes that they need.
Right.
In that extra 5 minutes, you might get the take that has the line or the improv moment that ends up being in the trailer, that ends up being in the film that people quote 50 years from now.
Right. Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Because it is all about time when it comes to production. And if you can make everyone feel important on that set, you watch how fast that's going to benefit you in the long run. And if you want to call it manipulative or shrewd, so be it. But it has never steered me wrong. And I've walked away from every single production, making new friends, making new family members, people that I want to collaborate again with all the time. And, and that to me is crucial, because there are going to be some tough fucking days on those sets. And if you know that, at the very least, you have that crew behind you, not against you, it definitely helps. It completely. I know that it wasn't supposed to be like some big analytical version of like what's the best advice, but like I guarantee you at least one filmmaker who's listening to that is going to try that, and they're going to get that shot or that extra take, and they're going to go, thank you, Joe Lynch, thank you for that, because fuck man, I got what I needed, you know.
Right.
Because again, it's a collaborative process. It should not be like a top down sort of situation. Like it takes a lot to make a movie, whether you're making it like with 10 people like Sean Baker just did with Red Rocket, or you're fucking Michael Bay and you have thousands of people that are all following behind you. At the end, you're still not doing it. It's not an insular job, and you have to treat the collaborative process.
Yeah, no, I love that advice, and I appreciate you taking the time to share all of this. And you always on the Movie Crypt, you wax people's cars, and you like to hype guests up, and sincerely, I mean, I'm a huge fan of yours. Obviously, I reached out to you for a reason. I didn't just go like, who's the coolest director out there? You know, let's find him. Scrolling IMDb, you know, to see who to pick. And honestly, man, I mean, I'm a huge fan of a lot of the same filmmakers, you know, and 2016, 2017, you know, Wes Craven passing away, Tobe Hooper, you know, George Romero is back to back. And it was cool, you know, listening to the Movie Crypt and hearing you and Adam, who are fans of the genre, still making movies. It's cool seeing generation to generation like this still happening, and that there's still people out there scrapping together the duct tape and a couple quarters to make a movie. And so, you know, it's a huge inspiration. You know, it's really amazing, and it's, you know, my palms were sweaty writing you a first email to say, hey, you know, will you come on the show? Because you're a big inspiration to me. So I wanted to do that. Didn't want to make it weird in the beginning, but I wanted to say thank you for, you know, all of the work you've done, the films you've made, and for just the podcast, like just sharing the realities, good and bad and ugly, about the industry. It's been awesome.
I was talking about this just recently, how like our original plan with the podcast was that it was just going to be 10 weeks to promote the Holliston show. And then, you know, like every week, and I think every creative goes through this, where Monday they're like, all right, I'm going to get those 10 pages done, or 20 or 30 pages written, or I'm going to accomplish this, I'm going to do that, or I'm going to get that call, I'm going to get that job. And by the end of the week, you're like, oh my God, I never wanted, why the fuck did I do this? What the fuck make this work? Like, I've just been beaten down. And then because of just the schedule, we would do it every Friday night. And by both Adam and I would get to the office and be like, I'm done. I'm out. Like, I can't deal with this anymore. It's all bullshit. We should just go into like, let's be pool cleaners. It'll be great. Like, we can just set up a little fucking shop. We'll get a pickup. We'll take all the other letters off, and we'll just say, yo, it'll be fine. Life will be simple. And then we have a guest on, and we realize, oh, they're dealing with the same thing that we're dealing with. And then because we all talk it out, and it becomes therapy, so to speak. Right. It allows us to vent enough to go, you know what? Let's pull up our socks and let's keep going, you know, because everybody goes through that. And it's helped us. It's helped other people. So no, Eric, that means the world to me that you'd say that, because again, we're all in this together, you know.
Yeah.
There is no delineated line between artist and audience, because we feel like if you don't love movies, you shouldn't be making movies. And if you're making movies, you should still be out there and find the reasons why you do it. So the fact that we can all do it together and talk about it on forums like this is a great thing. So I had a great time. I'm sorry if I went long myself, because I have a heart out.
No, you're fine.
But no, it was great, dude. And I can't wait to do it again.
Thanks for listening to the Film School podcast. If you appreciated the content on the show, don't forget to leave a 5-star review and hit subscribe so you won't miss a single episode.